Then I think it's now time to ask the representative of the Working Group 2, Pieter van der Zaag, to give his presentation. Pieter. So, thank you very much to the speakers of the previous sessions and also for your willingness, some of them, to step in on a very short notice. Very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Working Group 2, Water Diplomacy and the Resource. We had a very exciting working group. I really mean it. We had a very concrete question that we asked ourselves. How can system analytical approaches improve the dialogue between politicians, diplomats and system analysts in a transboundary context and lead to fair sharing of international waters? So our focus was very specific compared to Working Group 1. Working Group 1 was very broad and very ambitious, and they even make reference to the Sustainable Development Goals in Bucharest, etc. It was very big, and ours was very focused. Nevertheless, also very valuable in my view. We focused on the interaction between modelers, politicians and diplomats, and we had we could have benefited from a few more diplomats in our session, but they were crowded out by working groups 1 and 3, I guess. So we were a bit challenged in that respect. But nevertheless, the room was full, and Mosen, thank you very much, he had to go steal chairs somewhere else. So it was really very active. So we focused on 2 case studies, apart from some general introductions, the Aral Sea Basin and the Nile Basin. In both basins we have developed, I mean the people have developed models, and there are political challenges. And in the Aral Sea Basin, actually at this moment, if I understand it well, there is a stalemate at this very moment, and despite of the existence of several models, the first models were probably developed by Dane in the 90s, and later other models were developed for instance, by the Interstate Commission. But at the moment there's a stalemate. So these models have not been able to resolve problems. Models can perhaps help a bit. Models can give some insights into the multifaceted nature of basins and the different resources related to it. Some call it nexus. I used to call it just integrated water management, okay, but let's call it nexus. And the interdependencies that exist, and also the possibilities of win-win approaches. So these models can help the process, but they are not the answer. And as we can see in the RLC, there's a stalemate at the moment. The Nile case of this morning was very intense, and what you can see is that very cautiously, you see that the parties are going through a process of rapprochement, as Professor Arsano calls it, which is very encouraging, really very encouraging. And the models, ENTRO, Eastern Nile Technical Regional Office, must have played a very important role in the background to this. Okay, now back to where we, to our session, some of the findings. Okay, both modelers and diplomats think that they are rational and that the others are not. So that is a nice contradiction. Both have their own terms for defining what is rational. We, water expert modelers, think that we can do great things with water. Let us run a model and we have the answer. The problem is that we never asked to the politicians, what is your question? And there is actually, what we see, a very little interaction between politicians and experts. What is the real question? And for the politicians, it is important to first define a vision. Where do we want to be? And then they can define what the function of, for instance, a model can be. So the weakest link is the link between politicians and let's say system analysts. The interaction is problematic, is weak, is wanting, and we have to devise ways of strengthening that interaction. The diplomats are caught between a hard rock and a what was it again? Between a rock and a hard place, because they are like the marionettes of the politicians. They have to do what their bosses tell them, and then they have to face the technical people. And so there is this what we in Dutch sometimes would call communication, which is very difficult to translate, but it is like a distorted communication. And what modelers sometimes think is that the model is the answer. But we have learned in this session that it is jointly developing the model that would be the important thing to be. So jointly, not only the system analysts, but together with the diplomats and the politicians, interrogating each other and coming to eventually a model which is just a distorted, simplified reflection of reality. But then at least in the process something may have happened, a better understanding perhaps of, for instance, these interdependencies and the different linkages and nexus as they are. The typical behavior of a modeler is, the next step is I will make my model even better, because it's not good enough. And in the process, the models become more complex and more cumbersome. And these we need for operational water management, but not necessarily for policy making. We need to have the courage to simplify certain things for the political process. Furthermore, and that's another aspect that we discussed, is that there is, of course, some facts that are perhaps perceived to be objective. But then there is many data that are, as Erik Ansing said, I don't know if he is still here, that is contentious. And others would call it, like Shafiq, subjective. And that's a fact of life. And then I was very happy that Dinara mentioned we have to find a way to get towards intersubjective knowledge that is shared by the various parties. And that is, of course, really a big challenge. Okay, we had an interactive session.
Wow, what's this?
So we engaged everybody. We were very democratic, and we got all kinds of interesting suggestions for knowledge gaps and opportunities for action. And we are not going to repeat them all, because otherwise it will take too much time. But we just highlight a few. Knowledge gaps. First, risks are very difficult to communicate. And uncertainty in our data. And for instance, politicians, they dislike risk because risk is a potential problem in the political process. Yet we know that the future is uncertain. So how can we deal with that? This is not new, but this is nevertheless an important conclusion. Second, we make nice models, and then we have nice outcomes, quantitative outcomes. So much electricity can be produced, or so much food can be produced. But politicians perhaps are not interested in energy per se, or electricity per se. In the end, the Prime Minister is perhaps only interested in things like peace and prosperity. So is there a way to morph model outcomes into terms that is nearer to the life worlds of the politicians? Third, I've already mentioned. That's the point of intersubjective knowledge. And then opportunities for action. First of all, there must be more transparency in the data and in the models that exist. And a very concrete example was mentioned by Lama. Are you still with us? Perhaps you know the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam Ethiopia has agreed to have an international panel of experts giving their opinion about the safety and all the things of the dam and the impacts of the dam. The report is finished, but nobody knows what is in it. And this creates all kinds of speculations about what is in it, what is not in it, and it is actually becoming part of the problem. So we should find ways of becoming more transparent in these data.
Peter, can I ask you to speed up a little bit?
Yes.
Okay.
This is the last slide, and of course the last
key
signs
points
in my slides are dollars. 2. We have to better organize the science policy interface. And we can also morph it into organize the science politics interface. For instance, we should find ways of enhancing the dialogue between modelers and politicians. 3rd, contentious. The role of civil society in transboundary issues, but also the media, should be given more attention. Sometimes the media is a problem, sometimes it is a solution. And civil society should be better engaged in the process. The 4th point is, we have to train the politicians into water management and the water managers into politics. And then that at least will help them bridge the gap. And then finally, and now I echo Aaron Wolf's presentation, we have to train a new generation of water leaders, both technical and political. And, ladies and gentlemen, that costs money. But it is perhaps the best money spent for future water peace.
Okay, thank you very much.
On behalf of my fantastic group, our helpers, note takers, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Can I now please invite His Excellency Enayatullah Nabil, I hope I pronounce it in the correct way, the Ambassador of Afghanistan to the Netherlands, Mr. Eugene Stakif, to come to the table. And I hope that you would be willing to share with us in a frank and open way your viewpoints on the topic that has been discussed. So the technical approach to water management and how much this is necessary to solve also the problems in the ground, which are also very much political and diplomatic problems. Mr. Ambassador, please.
Oh, okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Eugene Stakif, please.
Well, I really don't have that much to add to what Peter laid out, because he did a fairly good job in summarizing the discussions that we had. So I just have a few points to make that reinforce some of the points that he made. One is that models are a mean to an end. So we build models to answer questions, to inform decisions. And there are different types of models that are built, and they all exist. And for years in the Nile River Basin and the Mekong and Tigris and Euphrates, wherever there's a contentious basin, the modelers spend a lot of time arguing and debating the models. So it took them a while to come to a consensus that the model that they have represents a pretty good version of reality, virtual reality. Okay, but at least it has the physics correct, has a hydrology, and you can't argue with the laws of physics and hydrology. So we all of us, the modelers who are here, who have been engaged in these wars of modeling, we all study from the same books, we study the same physics and hydrology texts. So the models have a certain consistency and there's a permanence in them. And they're interchangeable. So we have our decision rules. We know the kinds of things generally that society would like us to include in their models. Benefit cost analysis, maximize net benefits, there are all kinds of decision rules that we can use to answer the questions. The problem is the politicians and the diplomats don't study from the same physics texts that we do. Their decision rules and their views of the world are much more malleable. Each country has their own sovereign interests, and these things are not reflected in the models. So we'll build the models for the diplomats and the decisions that need to be made, but they have to pose the questions correctly. We can do the job, but we can't build a model if if the issue is not well characterized by the diplomats and the politicians. We can guess at what's going on in your head. I've dealt with lots of politicians, but sometimes it's impossible. We have no idea what you're thinking about. I mean, that's the reality. Mm-hmm. So the politicians and decision makers and the diplomats, they argue from a different playbook than what we use, and we don't understand quite exactly what it is that you're after. So where the gap exists is twofold. The diplomats need to pose the questions and give them to the modelers, and we'll develop the model that will help you answer the what-if scenarios. If I build this dam or if I build this irrigation system, what will be the downstream impacts? Who gains, who benefits, who loses, and what are some of the mitigation options that we could use to compensate for those losses and damages? And the technicians need to find simple ways to explain the complex models that they've built, and especially the uncertainty. Because with climate change, you're dealing with a whole new realm of uncertainties that are very difficult to explain to anybody, much less politicians. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this was a very good plea for the need for cooperation between the modelers and the politicians. I think now it's important that we also hear the perspective from diplomacy. Mr. Ambassador, I'm very glad to have you here, and we would be very much interested in hearing your views on this matter.
Thank you very much. As the protocol comes first, let me thank you, the organizers. Thank you, everybody who has been involved in this, organizing this important conference. Thank you, our representative of the group, which took the trouble to present the key finding of our group. Although the system analyst, I'm not a system analyst, it was really difficult for me to digest what was presented there. And as some of our colleagues jokingly were saying that the diplomats are lazy, they do not read, I tried very hard to register whatever information was provided in our group yesterday afternoon and this morning, and I found them very interesting. One of the most important things that for me is this, that I see in our group, they realized that there was little interface between the diplomats and the modelers or the system analysts. And that will be one of the biggest problems, because why diplomats cannot make the right decision, because they do not know the technicality of the issue, because they are completely coming from a different world. Mm-hmm. So this would make their life much easier, and also if they know more about the system analysts or the scientific part of models, then this will also help that the hard work of the analysts and modelers will not be wasted. And so they both come conclusion. The one thing, because it was more a technical thing, what we think as diplomats, it is very closely related to the topic of this conference, which is water security and peace, because both of them are bringing stability and peace. For me, just to make it a bit more personal, I'm coming from Afghanistan. We're a post-conflict country. I think even not a post-conflict, within a conflict, a post-conflict in between. As soon as we bring total peace in Afghanistan, our biggest problem would be water. Because the water is scarce in our region, we're an upstream country. We were not able to use the water we're supposed to use to bring peace and normalcy in our country. We have to generate jobs. We have to put programs, development programs. Definitely this will affect the water in the area, in the volume of water which will be flowing to our neighboring countries. So therefore, the work of the system analysts, the work of the modelers is very, very important, which will help us to avoid any conflict, because and one thing that about the training of the trainers and the training of diplomats, I see the leader of our group thinks that it is very costly, but there is nothing more costly than war, than conflict, than loss of life. Saving even one life costs billions. I know it is very difficult, especially this time of the economic crisis for Europe, for the United States, for other countries. But look how many billions of dollars we spent in wars in very recent years, including Afghanistan. So if any money we spend on that would be really money is well spent. Can I comment on the first group? There was one thing about international law. Of course, there are certain international law. First of all, going through to several documents or books which was written by scholars in this area, I realized that certain countries, even they agreed between themselves on transboundary water, they said they will not accept the international setting or document on that. Like they didn't want to bind themselves with the international convention existed in that area. So I hope the countries will find a common language or a common vision and agree to whatever is accepted in the international law, which is equitable and reasonable use and also no harm. Anything else related to our group? Yeah, one another thing is capacity building. So the countries that do not have the capacity, they cannot negotiate. They cannot understand the models. They cannot find a common language. So therefore, to find a common language, to establish regional cooperation, and to create a win-win situation, the training and capacity building would be very important. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, as an employee of Klingendaal Institute, I very much welcome also these calls for training, because that's exactly also a part what we do. We are a think tank, but we are also a diplomatic training institute. And this is exactly the type of activities we think would also be useful to contribute also in the context of the Water Diplomacy Consortium. I think you also very well pointed out how immensely important the issue of water is for your country, for Afghanistan. Is Afghanistan also one of the campaigners to get water higher up in the debate on the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yes, of course. Although we do not have transboundary water policy, we have a national water policy. We just developing one. We are working on it. It's the most sensitive issue currently in Afghanistan. We even didn't want to talk about it 5 years ago or 3 years ago. But there was some work done, and therefore it is very important. We would be definitely raise that question. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, then I want to invite Pieter van der Zaag also to join us and ask if there are questions from the audience. Please. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Alice Baumann, President of the Women for Water Partnership. I thank the presenters. I can only second what has been said. Hi, Arjeen. I have already, but there's one thing which I would like to add. 2 weeks ago, I was at the Global Soil Week in Berlin. And we had seen their beautiful models on how, for instance, to use and produce biofuels, which were made in conjunction by scientists and the government. And when I heard the presentation, I thought, wow, this is really wonderful. And then in the end came the catch, because the local people who were supposed to benefit, they didn't buy into it. So I would ask all three, especially the model builders, how would you address that challenge?
Okay, thank you very much. And also for making a very short and brief intervention. I leave the panelists to think about your question, and then I give the floor to another person who wants to ask a question. Please introduce yourself.
Teun Bastermeijer of the Water Integrity Network. In Peter's presentation, he talked about risks and uncertainty, even mentioning that politicians do not necessarily like risks and uncertainties. My question is, isn't it the opposite? Isn't it so that many people do not like certainties such as the current rapid degradation of watersheds that is still ongoing, uncontrolled, the current uncontrolled economic developments in water basins, mining and what have you, the certainty of very rapid growth of many cities in water basins affecting other places, certainly of population growth that we know is affecting the situation. So how to deal in terms of water diplomacy with making these certainties more discussable than they are right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? No, okay, then I'll give the panelists. Who could I ask to respond, please?
I'll take the biofuels question.
Please.
So the biofuels question is just like water management has two parts to it. One is the water balance. So we figure out the water budget, and then what do we do? What are the political, social decisions that are made which then influence the water balance? The biofuels question has the scientific component, how much energy goes into producing the plants and all of the pollution that's created. So what's the net balance of producing the biofuels? So that becomes more of a social question of whether you undertake that course of action or not, knowing what all of the impacts are and all of the benefits and costs downstream. So that, to me, that is a political issue. The scientific issue is calculating what those impacts are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Please, Peter.
And following also on the same thing, I want to mention this nice example of the Eastern Nile Technical Regional Office, where they have been developing models, but it is all local students who have been working with these models and improving them. So at least there is regional ownership at the grassroots, okay, not at the community level, but at least at the level of young scholars from local universities. So in so doing, I really hope that the things they produce are really tailored to the specific needs of the situation. Now, as to Teun Bastenmeyer's question, I can only answer it in a rhetoric way. I think politicians hate the unknown uncertainties, but the known uncertainties they like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's a very good ending of this session. We will leave it here. We found a bridge between, more or less, and we will continue with the next session. Thank you very much, speakers. It was a very good for your very good contributions. Okay. Very much.